Welcome to What I Meant to Say, where we discuss parenting, relationships, and wisdom that can be passed down through generations. Thank you so much for coming today.
Of course.
And doing this in person.
I'm so excited about it.
Love in-person conversations so much more. So I appreciate you making the drive.
Yes.
So Linn Rivers, and we connected over LinkedIn and just common ground on generational healing and how stories impact our lives and the way that we deal with the challenges that come at us, and then what we can learn and take part in that can help ourselves and the next generation. So thank you so much for being here
Thank
today.
you for having me. I'm excited.
So tell me a little bit about how you got into all of the modalities that you have grabbed onto through this generational healing journey that you've been on.
Yeah, so I think it's important to start with the fact that I am a functional health and wellness expert and educator. Yes. And what got me on that journey was because I myself had 30 plus years of pretty much constant trauma, right, in some form or another. And I started out as a baby with pneumonia when I was 1 and 3. And I don't know how much we talked about this before.
Yeah, but I think it's fascinating because what goes on at those ages, that things that we don't even remember always, and how they impact. So take it all the way back there.
So the funny thing is, when we are that young, we're taking on vibrations and feelings, not the words, but how are our parents responding to us, right? And so in that instance, when I'm tied down in an incubator, they had to hold my arms down. Of course, my parents were afraid I was going to die. And so the way that they were saying, I love you, was coming out in fear, right? So I, from that young of an age, took on the word love as something to fear. And so growing up, when I got old enough to speak and really comprehend what was happening, I was terrified of the word love. Every time they said, I loved you, I could feel my body tense and I would get like really fearful, and I would never say, I love you back. Because to me, it was like something that was like this really terrible thing, right? And so then as I got older, I was 8 years old and my grandma was my favorite person. Like, I loved her. I was with her more than anyone. And she was dying from a breast cancer. And I was in the hospital and I wrote her a note. And I stood up on the chair and I read it to her. And at the end, I said, I love you for the first time ever. And she took her last breath right after that. And so, of course, so when you're that age, when you're 8, you have a narcissistic brain and you think that everything revolves around you and everything you do is what causes, right? So I thought I killed my grandma.
Oh my gosh.
And so I carried that with me all the way through. At that point, I locked the word love in and I would never use it again. In fact, my mom died when I was 15. It was 4 days after my 15th birthday. And I never said I loved you to her because even though she was already dying, I was like, oh, but if I say it, she might die quicker. Right. And so I had that going through with childhood. But on top of that, I grew up with an alcoholic father. I was sick in and out of the hospital my entire childhood and teens with asthma. And then it turned into chronic digestive issues, suicidal depression, all the way through my 20s. And it's some of what was in my 30s as well. And I had a lot of different conditions. I had headaches all the time, migraines, just so many different symptoms.
Yeah.
And then I jumped into really toxic relationships because I like to complete the cycle of loss every 2 years, because I lost someone in my family every 2 years because they all died mostly before I was 15 and then a few after. And so I just kind of carried on that pattern. And it eventually came to the point where I actually attracted a partner who ended up dying of the same colon cancer that my mom died of. And it was that moment that I was like, I'm attracting this. Like, I am intentionally creating these scenarios in order to relive this childhood trauma because that's what I know.
Oh,
right?
Gosh.
And then my 2 near death experiences kind of brought me back in because I was dying at the same time my partner was dying. And so there was like this moment of just like, I need to shift my life. Like, I need to figure out what's happening, mind, body, spirit. And it just tapped me into a whole new world of diving into my health and my wellness and who am I and how am I showing up. And once I got on that track and spent a good 7 years alone, just like finding out who am I, then it really started moving forward with this like profound, like step forward, create your own reality and leave this stuff in the past.
Yeah.
And so here I am now helping others learn about chronic health conditions and mental illness from the functional perspective. and why we actually have these conditions and how to move through them without just going and, loading up on all these different forms of pharmaceuticals and
Yep.
changing their game, like actually living a happy and fulfilling life.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's profound. It's also everything that I believe in, that I have seen through my own story, through raising my kids, and the way that these, the body keeps the score, and the way that the mind, body, spirit connection is so alive. And if some cycle in there is broken,
Right.
if we aren't listening to one of those, if we're not able to understand how they're all connected, because everyone talks about mental health, right? Or, the spirit, or it's like, it's not mental health, it's health.
Right. It's all
And
connected.
the cellular health, the homeostasis that our body is seeking, and how do we find that?
Right.
And
Exactly.
there's so many different modalities, which I am intrigued by all of them. First of all, from your perspective, what are we up against as a society? Because they're just, unless you really get ingrained, and I think more and more people are, into the integrative way of life, people don't know, right? The short answer is take a pill.
Exactly.
But what have you learned that's different than that?
Well, I think that is the biggest problem is we are a quick fix society. I mean, everything is handed to us within seconds, and especially with the way technology has advanced, everyone expects things to be this like, I have to have it now, I have to have it now. And healing is not it happens now. It's a peeling back layer after layer until you get to the point of actually moving forward on a new trajectory and no longer incorporating these old things, right? And that takes time, and it takes practice, and it takes dedication. And unfortunately, I think a lot of the population, they don't have that self-dedication, and that is what's needed. It's like they dedicate their time and energy to so many other things other than themselves, not realizing that those other things are not going to exist if they're not here, if they're not happy, if they're not healthy.
Well, and it's a bypass in
is.
a way, right? It's always so much easier to help someone else than
It
to help
is.
yourself. People don't realize that. We get locked in that cycle. I've done it myself, where you look outward and you're like, oh, I can help you, and I can help you, and I
Yes.
can see that problem. But it's so many times it's a deflection from
Right.
not being able to sit with ourselves.
That's the majority of it.
Yeah.
Like 99% of that. I think people get hung up on. So when I had my near-death experience and I realized that our purpose for being here, every single one of us, is to be the best version of ourselves.
Yeah.
That's your purpose. It's not anything external of yourself. You didn't come here to be this like pioneer of something or to do X, Y, Z. You came here to learn about you, to learn this experience, and to be here. And when you can access who you are and be the best version of yourself and create your own reality, that is what changes the external world. You can't change anything in the external world. And people they can't comprehend that. It's like you have to work internally.
Yeah.
And if you're not giving yourself that time and dedication, even if you have kids, you still have to put yourself first, right?
Yes.
Because if you're
Learn that
not
one.
well, how do you plan on taking care of your kids?
Yeah.
Right. And I think that could be so many people's motivation right there is, oh, I have children and I want to see them grow and be healthy, and I want to have grandchildren, whatever it is.
Yeah.
That alone is an amazing reason to take care of yourself and figure out what you need.
Yeah. It's so crazy. And it reminds me, I mean, this whole concept of being better, right? And I've said it before on other podcasts, like sometimes it hits people wrong, but the focus is on the word be.
Yes.
It's not do better,
Right.
because it's something that I learned through my own healing process, is that ability to sink into your inward and into yourself and to be and not do. Locked in that productivity cycle that the world pushes, it's just making us sick.
It is.
And I mean, it's a real learning how to be present. It's a gift, and it's really hard.
It is.
And I'm wondering, like, from your perspective, I heard you say you were alone for 7 years.
Yes.
And that ability to sit with yourself, how do people learn to access that?
It's honestly, that's actually where doing comes down to. Actually, you need to do it. You need to allow yourself to sit in a room by yourself without your phone, without any distractions, and just sit there and allow that discomfort to start leaving slowly. It's a practice of laying in your bed with no sound on, nothing to distract you, and allowing yourself to just be in that moment and then let it grow. Like the next day, it might be a little longer and then a little longer. But the more comfortable you are being alone, the happier all of your other connections are going to be. Because 90% of relationships are based off of codependency.
Oh, gosh.
And they're based off of fear of being alone. So many people stay in relationships because they're afraid of being alone. Yeah. And I was just on a podcast yesterday. We were talking about the fact that divorce is beautiful. It is a gift. And I'm so happy for people when they're able to finally, this is not a good situation. It's not healthy. And this is not going to be beneficial for our kids.
Right.
They're going to be so much happy. I have chills because it's like,
me too.
If everyone likes to think about the abandonment, because that's what's happening, they feel abandoned instead of realizing that if they stay, they're abandoning themselves. Right. So I love when people are able to get to that point of like, I'm not happy and this is not going to get better because we're growing separate.
Yes.
Right. And it's like that alone is one of the most powerful things that people can do, even though they know it means I'm going to be on my own.
Right.
And I get to learn about me and I get to figure out who am I and what do I want.
Yeah.
Right? Because that is where all of the good things are going to come from.
It's so true. I tell people all the time, like when they say that fear of being lonely, I'm like, you are lonelier in an unhealthy relationship than you will ever be on your own.
Yes, exactly.
And but until you get there and feel it and realize that amount of growth that comes from connecting with yourself, it's taking that leap.
I know.
And if you have two people that are both on a growth track that want to grow together, great.
Yes.
But you can't be just one.
No.
And, the growth path is lifelong. And so if there's any stifling of curiosity, if somebody, doesn't absorb that bigger version of yourself and want to be with that, you're much better off.
Right. Because
the world needs the best version of you.
The authentic self.
Yes.
Like, that is the most powerful word lately is authenticity.
Yeah.
And it's so much more than like the fad that we've given it. It's like true authenticity is not you like, oh, look at my red hair, or hey, I'm gay, look at me. That's not it. Like those things don't matter.
Labels.
What matters is what matters is who are you showing up as a person. And this goes to all the people who judge other people just like based off of those things too. It's like, no, don't judge them off of that. Go based off of who are they showing up as, and are they being a good human? Are they being gentle? Are they being nice? Are they worthy of your attention back?
Yeah.
Right?
Our quote around here, and I don't watch a lot of news. I turned that off quite a long time ago.
Good.
But, with everybody being put in these silos and putting labels on everyone, right? My slogan around here has been like, kindness is inclusive.
Right.
Like, don't judge, show up as the best version of yourself that you have that day. And that can be different on different days, and just be kind.
Yes.
Imagine what would happen in this world.
Well, imagine what people would be capable of too if they stopped worrying about like, how do I look? What is my gender? What should I be called? Like all of these things.
Exactly.
It's like, that doesn't matter if you're not showing up as someone who's going to deserve that respect from people.
Yeah.
Right. And it's comical to me that people think like they're creating this whole new reality by just creating more boxes. You're like, oh, I don't fit in the boxes. I'm this. And I'm like, you just created another category.
Yeah.
Like, that is just another box. How about just be a human and be a decent one?
Yeah.
Like,
amen.
Just be
there
a good
you
human.
go.
Like, it's really not that difficult. No one needs to know about your sexuality unless you're sleeping with them. Like, no one needs to know about any of these things unless you are in an interaction that involves that.
Yeah.
Like, there's no reason for any of this information. Just be a good human and figure out your path and what you want to do in life.
Yeah.
And share it.
And let the healthy relationships come from there. And please let kids be kids.
Yep.
Like, just let them play.
Right.
They don't judge each other. We teach them to.
I know.
They come out so pure and ready to just play with anybody and learn about themselves. And we take that away from
labels.
them. Yeah.
Like zero.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so true.
Yeah.
So in your healing journey, when you were coming through that ability to sit with yourself, what did that feel like? And how did you get through it?
I mean, at first it was really uncomfortable, right? Of course. I mean, the biggest growth is we're always going to be in uncomfortable moments when we're growing. And I mean, I was in the bars before I was 18, because again, my dad had no idea what I was doing, and I was attached to not great people. I had very unhealthy relationships. That was just where I was. And then it was an evolution of seeing like, oh, this doesn't feel good, you know, like throwing up on the side of the street and puking blood. Like, it's not where I want to be, you know? And then so it was like a next step out. And then those people were a better crowd, but then I evolved out of it. And it was that allowance of the evolution to like, okay, I'm not fitting in here anymore. It's time for me to move on, and not feeling this need to grasp to anything. And then it just became a point where I got to that space where I'm like, well, I'm not really connecting with these people anymore, so maybe I'll just stay home. And then I would stay home and I'd watch a movie by myself. And that was kind of like the first part of like, okay, like this is different. You know, it was a different feeling. But then it just started getting like, oh, I like this. Like, I want to stay home now and I want to watch a movie. And I didn't have to try to pretend to be enjoying the company that I was with. And then it turned into, I got rid of my cell phone. I went without a cell phone for a couple of years.
Oh, a couple of years. Okay, wait. Let's talk about that a little bit, because that changes your brain in the society we're living in today.
Oh yeah.
Okay, just break that down a little bit. How'd you even do that?
So first off, I mean, it was just something that felt right, because I was acknowledging like, oh, I keep repeating these same relationships with people and I really want to make a change. And I feel like when I'm attached to everything, I get anxious.
Yeah.
Because I expect people to respond to me, and I expect, you know, and so it's like, how can I shift that? How can I like, what's going to help me get through that? I've always been very growth oriented. I wanted to know like, what's going to make me better. If it's uncomfortable, that's okay. Because look at my past. Like, I had to get through a lot of discomfort. So these kinds of things didn't really faze me. And so I moved to Ashland, Oregon. And I was like, you know, I'm going to go without a cell phone. And I did. And it triggered people like you would not believe. Like when I would say, okay, like I have a house phone, you're going to have to call me. And they're like, I can't text you. I'm like, no, like you have to call me. But the most beautiful thing about that experience was I always found exactly what I needed by just being out in wherever I was going. Like I would wake up and I was like, you know, I want to play Ultimate Frisbee today. It would be cool if I could find a spot. And I'd go to the store, completely off topic of it. And I'd go to the store and I literally bump into someone and she'd be like, hey, I'm going to go play Ultimate Frisbee today. Do you want to join me? And I was like, perfect.
It was such a clear energy field.
Yes,
So
right?
good.
Like I was guided to the things that I wanted or that I needed. And that really just changed. Like now I am very detached from my phone. I rarely take it anywhere that I go. It usually stays in my car. And it's a beautiful thing because of that experience where it's like, oh, this feels amazing when people can't just like immediately contact me. And now, of course, the people that I connect well with, they're the same. So they don't expect me to respond right away, vice versa. It's a mutual, like sometimes I have my phone, sometimes I don't, but I'll get back to you when I'm able. Yeah. Right. And we're still like inching towards that. I think people could like do really well with not having their phone in their pocket 24/7 or not having it like an accessory. Yeah. And it just,
the anxiety that comes with that. I mean, I have 4 kids, right? And through the years, they're 23 to 16, like the ability, and everyone's like, oh, do you know where they are? Are you tracking them? I really didn't. And then this last one, I have tracked him a little more. It's the worst. It is the absolute worst. He has more freedom. I'm doing more. He's younger when he got his driver's license, that kind of thing. And every time you check it, it doesn't make me feel better. It makes me feel worse. I don't have any control over where he is and what he's doing.
Exactly.
So you do realize if you're mindful, like I let go of it a little more, because the world's got you thinking it's more responsible to do these things, and it's really not.
Right.
Like their grades are their grades. That brain is gonna, if you don't trust it, you can't let it out. But they have to grow, and we can't do anything about it.
Exactly.
It's a crazy concept.
Yes, and there's 2 parts to this too, right? The fact that a lot of parents are worried, well, what if something happens to my kid? And the reality is, what is that text going to do, or paying attention to them that's any different? You're not going to know if they're hurt, even if you see that their tracker's on. Like, I'm not trying to put fear in people, but the reality is, like, that you tracking them is not going to stop an incident from happening, whatever that is, right? Or it's not going to stop them from doing drugs if that's the road that they're going down.
Yep.
And on the other side of it, if you are tapped in and you're turned on and you're able to receive information, you're going to know far before getting any text message if something's happening.
You just gave me the chills.
You know,
that has been my road of parenting, and my kids, we joke about it.
But it's true.
I have a sense. In fact, one of the stories, and Ashley was part of it, was the 16-year-old I'm talking about a year and a half ago fell at early skateboarding before school. And I had this sick feeling, like I was like, something's going to happen.
Oh, yeah.
And not 20 minutes later, he called me, and he had, fractured his L1 and needed 10 stitches in his hand, and had hit a stop sign going down a hill. And I had just had ankle surgery, so I couldn't access him. And I had to mobilize the troops to go pick him up. But I knew it was going to happen. Yep. And the crazy thing is, you have to, if you're clear,
right,
and you're open to it,
yes,
you have to trust your intuition. So that gets, that's the direct, that leads back to the functional, integrative way of life, right? So how do we learn to trust our intuition?
Right. Well, right. That all comes down to learning about yourself. Literally everything comes back to who are you and what are you wanting from life? Because when you figure all of that out, you're completely living from that energetic space of this is me and I'm creating my reality. And part of that means that you're tapped into yourself in a way where anything that enters your field, if it's a yes or a no immediately. Yeah. Right. And that is your intuition. You are an intuitive being. And you're constantly being given guidance all the time. And you're always going to take the path regardless that you're moving down. Yeah. Right. And so even if you think that it's this conversation made me lead to this. No, it's you knew this, but you needed confirmation from all these other people or whatever situation before you got there. Yeah. But you didn't need all of that sidestepping. You could have just gone down that path in the first place. Right. And I just think that people are so hyper focused on everything around them and how people think they appear versus how they're actually appearing and what they're doing.
Yeah. So how do you think, because I've done this in my own life, you have to kind of identify some of that conditioning, right? That comes in through childhood, that comes in through, I tell my kids all the time, parents are just people, we're doing the best that we can. And that's usually, most often I think is the case. There are some tragic situations where it's not, but
of course
we, as a general rule, and we're doing the best we can, but there's still some conditioning in there that we have to deprogram as we get older to embrace this authentic self.
Yes.
So what's your opinion on that? How do you walk people through that process?
I think the bigger part here is that the majority of what we're doing in life is unlearning. Right? Because we do, like we were talking about earlier, kids be kids. Yeah. That's not the case. It's you go to church with me, you go here with me, you do this, you think this, you believe this. And that's most people's lives. I was lucky enough to have a mom and dad who they didn't force religion down my throat. They wanted me to grow up and find my own truth and, be me. And a lot of people don't have that. Nowadays it's more common. But I also like to touch on the fact that evolution is important to remember too, because our generations before us, parents who grew up in the 50s and the 60s, they had a completely different lifestyle. Yeah. And they had so much to unlearn, but they didn't have the tools to do it that we do. Yeah. So have a little bit more compassion for where they were, but also understand that where they were was a much more a rigid stance. Yeah. And so just because they taught you something doesn't mean that that's what you should continue believing. Yeah. Right. But also I think it comes down to that compassion for their generation. Yeah. Because they did not have the tools. Sure, my dad was an alcoholic. He put me in a lot of dangerous situations, and my mom and dad's relationship was not a good connection and all of these things. And I don't blame them for that. And before my dad died, I had so much compassion for him. There's not an ounce in me that was you kept me sick your whole life and you did this, so I'm going to hate you. It was never like that. It was just my poor dad. I had so much compassion because he had a lot of the same experiences that I did. He lost all of his family. He lost his wife. He was sick, all of these things. And he didn't have the tools to get better. Yeah. I do. Yeah. I get to move that forward.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like holding on to that anger from our parents is one of the things that holds us back.
Yeah.
Instead of realizing that, oh, I can see what they were and who I don't want to be, and move on and let that be in peace. Right. And that's how you let go of that. I think more than anything, you start moving away from those belief systems, because it's just like this. You're carrying the hatred and the aggression or the frustration with what they did to you.
Yeah.
Instead of like, okay, that was then, but now I'm in charge of my life and I get to move on from that, you know? And so I think that's where people get to unlearn everything, is by compassion.
Yes.
And knowing where their parents were.
Yeah. And there's so much repression in that generation. And we know cellularly what that does to us.
Right.
Right. And that's where, you know, as we explore the modalities that help us heal, it's amazing what those can do. But that compassion that comes in, and every time I get in a situation where, you know, forgiveness can be hard at times. It's not, I'm really big on the character strengths, and forgiveness has always been pretty high on my character strength assessment. And but it can be hard. And that letting go of whatever it is that the compassion shows up there.
Right.
And it's healing for everybody.
It is.
And the words that always come through for me are just love them more.
Yeah.
Because that's the only thing that really heals.
Hurt people. That is one of the most true statements I've ever heard.
Yeah.
And I had a woman on a podcast yesterday ask me, but how do you just like go ignore like these people doing awful things in the world and still have like this sense of like punishment, in a sort, is how she worded it. And I told her, I was like, you know, that the fact is, it's like these people who are out there doing like really harmful things to people, they're hurt and they're not getting the help that they need.
Yeah.
Right. And so to have compassion, to know, like, imagine how much pain someone must be in, or the psychosis of this person in order to get to that space. Like, that is pain, you know, like missing your exam is not pain. Like, this person is experiencing pain and they have absolutely no tools to move through it.
Yeah.
And we're not giving them the tools to move through it. You know, I think where I'm at right now in the mental health aspect, and what have been researching for years and years, and understanding of like, our body is the physical response. Our traumas are not what are responding. Our external factors are not the response. Our bodies are physically responding, which means there's an imbalance. And nobody is teaching these people about their imbalances in their body so they can actually get better. And I think about my dad and how sick he was and how his body was just deteriorating. I mean, he couldn't even lift his right arm past this point.
Yeah.
And come to find that I have a genetic marker that came from him, and these sulfation markers, which means your body doesn't sulfate well. And so when you can't do that, your liver, it doesn't function and it's not processing things. So all the sulfur builds up in your body and causes neurological symptoms, and your body just starts shutting down, and he lost use of his legs and all of these different things, right? And when I found out about that, and I started working on my own body and getting that in check, and I was actually mentally clear for the first time in my life after being suicidally depressed, I was like, imagine if my dad had just been given this information, how much better his life could have been. But we didn't have that, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, it needs to be talked about, because there are certain genetic mutations that through diet alone can actually set off a cascade of emotional responses and outbursts, aggression, you know, depression, and crying. Like, I used to have these episodes where 20 minutes after eating, I would break down crying, and I'd be like, why am I crying so much? And it turns out it's because I had this mutation and I wasn't sulfating, and it was causing these emotional responses. And it'll still happen if I overeat certain foods. And so like, I know like, okay, like, I know I ate too much of this, and now I need to do something to help my body out so it can.
Oh my gosh. So how do people access that testing to know, like, what's a baseline for people if they were just starting out? That's a crazy concept, because I've been down this road started with my son and my youngest, and it taught me so much about what we all need.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, what works for a kid on the spectrum is the same thing that works for us, is the same thing that works for an elite athlete.
Right.
Right? I mean,
Yeah.
everybody is just looking for little ways to get better.
Right.
But where do you start?
So one of the best ways, now we talk about the genetic mutations, and the thing is, like, genes don't dictate your future. So just because you have these genetic mutations doesn't mean that they're going to express. Mine expressed because I got started very early on with antibiotics and all of these things that destroyed my gut microbiome. And our gut plays into a lot of that process, because if you don't have the gut microbiome to break down all the components that you're eating and the way it nourishes your body, it's going to affect your neurological system, because your liver is going to have to take on that excess burden. So you can get DNA testing through different sources. They have 24andMe can even do it. But I personally like the Strat gene. It's from Ben Lynch.
Okay.
And that one detects the 7 dirty genes. So there are 7 genes specifically that if you have mutations in them, they correlate to a lot of different symptoms. And when you take that test, you get to find out, like, oh, I have certain mutations. I have a mutation in almost every single one of those 7 dirty genes.
Wow.
So it's no reason that I had so many different, symptoms. But the other thing that I like to point out is when you have gut dysbiosis, which again links to that, you not being able to break down certain compounds. And I think we touched a little bit about plant compounds.
Yes. Yeah, when we were talking before.
Yes. Yeah. And so salicylates are one of the compounds found in plants. And those alone are directly linked to autism. They're directly linked to aggression, depression. They're linked to, what is that? There's another Alzheimer's or dementia. I can't remember which ones, but it's another direct link. Okay. And then it's also the black rings around your eyes, running noses, all of those different symptoms, headaches, like all of that comes from salicylates. And if you have leaky gut, which a large portion of people do, those are going to affect you because they're getting into your bloodstream and causing those symptoms. And it's profound what happens when you know about something so simple and pull it out of a diet and watch a kid who is on the spectrum all of a sudden flourish, right? And completely shift. I mean, when I was in the depth of my illness, I honestly probably would have been marked as autistic, because I had zero interest in being around people. I would not look people in the eyes. I didn't know how to communicate. Like, there was like a genuine discomfort of being in society. And then when I shifted away from that and finally learned about this stuff, I was like, oh, I actually want to talk to people. Like, this is okay. Like, I feel comfortable putting myself in situations again. And it was just really fascinating to witness that. And that's why I did so much research on that, and it's 15 years of research at this point of just like learning about this stuff and finding that 98% of people with mental disorders is because of something that they're eating that's triggering these responses. It's
so frightening to me, because we have made such vast improvements and we know so much more now, but the system we're up against it's scary. And it's like to dig into where we are with our food supply and how, it's not clean. The soil is depleted. I mean, it literally is a ground up problem that we're dealing with. And I have an ag business degree, and I didn't know that it was going to end up, my understanding of where we are now and how I was taught 20 years ago. Right. And where that all is coming down. Yeah. So when you add that all the way up to the big pharma nightmare of here, take a pill, and not to say there are certain situations, but it's mind-blowing to me. And I wake up and it always comes back to the small steps, like what can we do that we have control over to heal ourselves? Yes. Because I believe we are such self-healing beings. Right? We have it in us. And people don't realize that. No. But I do believe that the message is changing. The collective intelligence is growing. But man, what do you, with the people you work with, what you do in your life, how do you really ground that into practical application? Because sometimes it just feels so daunting.
Again, like, I know it's like, it seems like a reiteration, but it's really being self-dedicated, like really turning in and being like, what do I actually need versus what do I think I need? Because a lot of people think like, oh, well, I need to go to the spa today. It's like, that's not self-care. Like, that's nice. That's extra, but that's not self-care. Like, when are you eating? What are you eating? Who are you eating with? Right? Like, we were talking about relationships, but the reality is like who you surround yourself with in general is going to have a big impact on your life. And there's so many people who they want to make these shifts and they're like, okay, I want to do better for myself. I want to start working out every day, or I want to start eating better. And then they have friends who are like, oh, why are you doing that? Like, let's go. They just opened up a new donut shop. Those friends are going to be the ones that are going to keep pulling you back in. Yeah. And you need to ask, like, is this going to get me to where I want to be? Because I think the big question that every single person can ask themselves in order to step into this, even if it's just like a small step every day, is if 5 years from now, if you are living the same life that you're living right now, or it gets worse, are you going to be happy? And the massive response is probably going to be no, of course not.
Right.
Right. So you have to make that change now, because the actions that you take today are going to be the future that you move into. You can't keep going down this one path and expecting different results later on. And so I think when people can ask themselves that, they'll actually start researching more and they'll start finding other solutions. And it's like, you can go and get a pill from your doctor, but do know that that's going to actually make you worse down the road, because not only is it masking the symptoms of what's actually happening in your body, but it's also causing a lot of other symptoms that you're then going to need to correct because of this pharmaceutical.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just,
that's what I love about integrative and functional medicine and modalities, is that it is addressing root cause.
right.
And that is not what America and Big Pharma are doing today.
No.
There is no tracing things back to root cause, and we're all just walking around reacting to what hurts.
Right.
And it's a totally different game when you start to dial it back all the way back to the root.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. And with that being said, there really is like only a couple of true root causes. Right. And I'm unpacking one of them right now. I've been doing a lot of research. Do you want me to tell you about it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So insulin resistance is linked to, at this point, over 98% of all disease. And guess how many people are diagnosed with insulin resistance? Over 88% of the population has insulin resistance and doesn't even know it. So 50% of the population at this point is either pre-diabetic or diabetic. The precursor to pre-diabetes is insulin resistance. But the bigger picture is insulin resistance is literally connected to every disease that you can imagine, like directly correlated. It's not just like this, and so I'm unpacking like, okay, let's dig further. Like, how is this affecting the microbiome? Because for me, there's three things that are causing. Well, really it all comes back to two, because I say there's insulin resistance, there's the microbiome, and there's immobility, like the lack of movement.
Yeah.
But the reality is the immobility goes back to insulin resistance. So it's a direct cause of insulin resistance. Smoking, drinking alcohol, lack of motion, like all of these things cause insulin resistance, which then literally affects every single cell in your body. So that it's a hormone, right? It's made in the pancreas.
Yes.
And when people think of insulin, they think, oh, it's the stuff that diabetics take. That's literally what a lot of people think of as insulin.
Like, no, your body actually makes
No,
it.
your body makes it in your pancreas, right? And this hormone, so a lot of our hormones, they only affect one area of our body. This affects every single cell in your body. They used to think that it wasn't linked to, brain health, and they found like, oh, it's even linked to this. And so it's just like, we're finding over and over that it's like connected to every single piece of illness, right? And when you look at the basis, it's like people are eating so many carbs. We're not meant to digest that many carbs, because the more you eat, the more your insulin spikes. Your glucose goes up, it spikes your insulin. You're not supposed to be on insulin overdrive like that, like we are in this world.
Yeah.
And it's a world. It's not even like America is this. It's all of the different countries. And we're a high carb intake now.
Yeah.
And so it's like reading all of this though, and going into depth with this, and like the more I learn about it, I'm like, oh my God, this is why every time I research like hormone issues and everything, like I come back to the basis of like insulin resistance, and I'm like, oh my God. And so then I just started researching insulin resistance itself, and I'm like, I could have just cut out all of this and gone straight to this, and it would have like explained everything that I've been researching.
Wow.
Yeah.
And it really is just, it's learning about that, and then tailoring your diet to help your body to respond properly.
Yeah.
to not put you into that overdrive.
Right.
Because as you release insulin then and you crash, and then you're going to crave more carbs. Right.
Right.
So
And there's a lot to it, which is why I'm making the course, because there's still a point to, while you're healing and you're getting better, you want to take care of the other conditions too. Like your hormones are out of balance. You need to correct that while you are fixing this other problem. But even just like fixing the insulin connection can oftentimes make people feel better within like days.
Wow.
Right. For myself, I had to really go, like, I'm still like getting my glucose levels back in check because I was so far off. I was pre-diabetic, even though I looked super thin and healthy.
Wow.
And that's the thing. It doesn't look one way. It's not just like, oh, these people are overweight. It's everyone is on the path to insulin resistance at this point.
Man.
And so
how have you gone about that? Because it's not something you can create, just change in one day or 1 week. So how have you gone about finding, healing through that?
Well, so I'm okay with extremes. Like I'm one of those where I can do things like cold turkey. And so I actually started the keto diet, which is so funny because I was so resistant to it at first, because as a nutritionist, I'm like, oh, here comes another fad diet. Like, great. And then I started researching it because I'm like, okay, this is picking up like a lot of momentum with science, right? And I was like, let me dive into this. And the science behind it is just like, oh, our bodies actually like do really well on ketones. And cancer, 99% of cancer feeds on glucose. Only like a couple of cancers will actually feed on ketones, but the majority of them are glucose. And I was just like, this makes so much sense. And then I watched this guy who owns, what do you call those? Like old home centers?
Oh, like
not retirement homes, but what are they called? Why am I blanking on that?
Well, like past the rest home, like convalescent hospital type.
No, like nursing homes, but they're a little bit more free.
Oh, okay. So assisted living.
There you go. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
I wasn't sure which direction you were going. Okay.
Okay, so like assisted living houses. He owns several of them. And he started doing research on the keto diet also. And he went to one of his nursing homes. He's like, I'd like to try something. And he got permission from all of the people and their parents or whatever, who were, responsible for them. And he put them all on a carnivore diet. And he's like, let's just see what happens. Over 88% of them who had Alzheimer's completely reversed. Some of them to the point where they actually went home because they no longer needed to live in the assisted living. And all the others got so much better that they were actually playing and doing activities around the assisted living house. And he's like, this is not accident. He's like, every single person that we put on did better. And so I have chills because now he's doing it in all of his houses. And it's just like, it's the bigger question of, have we been missing what humans actually need for so long? And we think about the fact that we used to eat like the meat and potatoes diet.
Right.
Yeah. And we didn't have access to all these different foods that we have so much access to now thanks to importation.
Yeah.
And the reality is all of these plants have their own chemicals that are causing so many disruptions in our bodies that we're not even aware of because we were only supposed to eat them in small quantities.
Yeah.
Right? Like we had a potato, we had a protein, and we had a green. We didn't have like kale and spinach and zucchini and olives and all of these. We never ate that together. Our liver literally cannot process all of those plant toxins. And so our body backs up. And so it's just like, why are we asking the bigger question? We just follow these trends and think like, oh, okay, this is a cool thing to do, so I'm going to do this. But we never actually get down to the functions of what the human body is and what it needs. And that's what I'm doing, right? My research is like based on like, what does it actually need versus our ego mind and what we want to morally eat and what we think is correct.
Or the marketing mind of what's being pushed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's just like in my course, obviously I don't like say like, this is what you have to do. Yeah. I give people options. Like if you're going to go this direction, this is the best way to do it, but yeah,
So tell me more specifics about your course.
So as a functional medicine practitioner, I was doing one-on-ones with people, but they had to pay $3,000 in order to just get all the testing done. Yeah. And I'm like, most people don't have access to that. because unfortunately, if you want to get better, it's not covered by insurance.
No, that's a whole
So,
nother podcast.
yes,
We could go
right?
on forever.
And so it's like, how can I get this out there to everyone who desperately needs this information? And I was like, I'm going to create a course, and I'm going to give them all the information that I would give to a client coming in as a one-on-one. And I actually figured out ways to help people without having to do the testing, which is a huge game changer.
Yeah.
Right? Because there are certain tools now that people can use that can get the same results as if they went and got a test. And so I figured out all of these different things and I put it together. So the course is literally like the mentality, like making sure you're talking to yourself correctly and understanding the words that you use. And so the mental, the physical, and the emotional aspects of everything thrown into this. It's cellular function, it's your liver function, microbiome, all of these different things, overcoming diabetes. And it's set to really help people understand why so many people are sick and how to change it, right? So they can get better, whether it's mental illness or it's chronic conditions in general. And so I was like, you know what, I'm gonna make this $50 so everyone can access this. And so during the pre-launch, and I'm keeping that going for a while because I have so many podcast interviews like out until March at this point that I'm like, well, if people are going to hear this, I want them to have access to it. So up until the end of like my podcast, you know.
It's so great because when you see the rise in autoimmune diseases and in allergies and behavioral issues in kids and adults, like there's no question
I know
that what is going on is so foundational. And the access to good information this is what I love about the podcast world.
Right.
Because the truth, everybody, is in the podcast world.
I know.
Like we're speaking freely and people are rising up. Everyone's like, oh, there's just more podcasts. That's because everything that is big and sponsored is against us.
Yes.
And that's just how it is.
Right.
So turn your vision to the podcast world. I'm so glad you're doing. I'm
Yeah.
so glad you're doing so many podcasts because I think that's where the health and healing is. That's where the people that are really wanting to wake up and be part of this collective vision of healing.
Yes.
And man, America is crying for it. The world is crying for it. And I love seeing everyone uniting under that because that's what, we call them light workers around here because you just, and I know there's so many out there and we find each other.
Right.
And it's really, really cool.
Exactly.
Because it's not a big fancy industry. It's not a bunch of famous people, but it's growing like crazy.
Right.
Okay, so I have a lot more and more. I have friends that have really cool tattoos. And I see some on you. I'd love to hear the story.
Yeah, so I have a lot.
Yeah,
I mean, my ribs are covered, my back, I have a lot of tattoos. And it actually started, my dad, he took me to get my first tattoo when I was 17. And it's because he'd rather me be doing that than drugs, right? So he's like, well, tattoos, representation, it's helping her express herself, but he didn't want me doing drugs. So I started with tattoos and piercings. And his friend was actually the person who first pierced me. But my tattoos, my first one was a tribal star, and it's about 20 years old now. It's crazy to look back and think like how it's about 20 years old. And then my snake tattoo, which I know that we were just talking about snakes are my animal totem. So when I dream about them, I know to prepare for something in my reality.
Yeah.
And it's based off of, am I sleeping with them? Like, am I cuddling the snake? Is it like a good, or is it biting me? Is it like trying to warn me of something? And so I can tell by if it's trying to warn me, it'll bite me. If it's trying to, then it's like, okay, something good's coming in. And so I've always had that. And then my Japanese waves and my yin yang, it's a connection to water, fire, natural elements, the balance of life. And the last tattoo that I got was actually with my partner who passed away. And it was The Trouble Is You Think You Have Time. And, she was 28 at the time that we got them. And so it was just like that moment of, she thought that she could, long story short, she was married when she and I met.
Okay.
And we were just friends, but she divorced her husband and she came out. And we had a beautiful year together before she died. And it was like at the end of that year that we found out she had cancer. And so we got that tattoo because she put off a big chunk of her life living for herself. And it was just kind of like this, like, we do have time, but you don't have time to wait to be who you are. Right. And so I got those tattoos, but really all of my tattoos tell a story from some point in my life. And I think it's a beautiful thing because in tribal communities, you know, they use their body as a way to tell their life, and mine does that. You know, it's like the animal totem and the balance and who I am as a being.
It's really cool. It's one of the ways that I've changed over the years. Like, I think my kids, when they were little, they would have been like, Mom would never let us get a tattoo. And now I am so intrigued by the stories, because the people I know, they do tell incredible stories about their lives.
They can. I recommend, if you're going to get a tattoo, to get a meaningful one. That's something that connects you to yourself more. Like every time you see it, you're reminded like, oh yeah, I remember when I got that or why I got that. And some of mine have funny stories, but you know, like it was still part of my journey. And so it's not some just like Mario head though, or
yes, no, they're definitely, I know some of those are definitely from like maybe earlier years of people that I know, but the path I'm on now, I'm always intrigued because it's really meaningful with people that are, you know, living a very conscious existence.
Yeah. And you know, one last point to my tattoos is I actually think I was supposed to look youthful because my messages tend to reach kids more, because kids feel an easier connection to me because I don't look like the stereotypical teacher or educator of like, you know, like clean cut. And so I think they really gave me an edge that allows me to connect to the younger generation. So I love them.
I love that. I'm all about it. I always say if there's things that I can, if people can learn things younger than I did,
right,
I'm doing my job.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for joining us on What I Meant to Say, another production of Inspired Edutainment, brought to you by Be Better Media.